So when I set out to set up Arura Capital, it was let us build a fund that solely invests in female-founded, female-led, and female-focused businesses. Because as a woman allocating capital, I have very good access to other female entrepreneurs through my networks, but I also understand the goods and services that are catering to women. The research that shows that when women allocate capital, and they're the ones that are actually making the investment decision, they're 3 times more likely to invest in female founders. To live life where it's only about you is a very, very boring life, I think. You really want to be able to showcase legacy. You really want to be able to showcase how has it impacted that woman who would have never had access to capital if we didn't show up. So I think there's something very powerful in that. When people can look at our fund and look at our businesses, they can really want to know the God that we serve.
Here's to bold visionaries, faithful investors who make God the goal. While some may call them crazy, we see a joyful adventure. God has empowered us to use courageous capital, solving the world's greatest problems under His power for His glory. Welcome to the Faith-Driven Investor Podcast. Opinions expressed in this podcast, including the team and guests, are solely their opinions. Hosts and guests may maintain positions and securities discussed. This podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be relied upon as specific investment advice for any individual or organization. Thanks for listening.
One of the great joys that we have as a team is seeing God at work around the world. And it's not just in one place, but it's also not just with one people. It's entrepreneurs, it's investors, it's governments, it's partners in places that you might expect and places you might not otherwise expect, coming together to do more than we might otherwise do apart. Today we're here in Nigeria, and we get to hear the story of how God is at work here, moving a place that decades ago may have been a place of aid and moved into a place where there might have been concessionary investing, to really looking into and seeing the opportunity that's here for decades to come in a market rate return with some of the biggest unicorns happening across the continent. Let's get started on today's conversation. You know, there is something about Lagos, like just the energy, the dynamism here. It's hard to really describe, and I'm going to fall short in trying to describe it. So I'm going to leave it up to you. How would you describe the energy of what is Lagos?
Yeah, so I think that you really have to experience it when you come here. But it's a very dynamic, fast-moving city. It's give or take 25 million people. No one knows the right number. But give or take
Small
25.
number, give or take 25 million, right?
Yeah. Give or take 25 million people. I would say 70% of those people are under the age of 30. And there's just this budding entrepreneurism and budding energy of everyone's trying to, I don't want to say make it because it sounds a bit cliche, but everyone's trying to build a better life for themselves. And I think when you're stacked with so many of the odds that we have in terms of a poor infrastructure and poor access to electricity and, roads that are not always paved, perfectly, you build a resilience that kind of fuels that energy. And I think that if you can make it in Lagos, you can make it anywhere. It's a little bit like that song, New York song. Yeah. I think you can replace New York with Lagos.
There you go.
Because there's just a spirit of entrepreneurship, a spirit of resilience, a spirit of, we'll make it no matter what. As people are trying to build better lives for themselves, as people are trying to build better lives for their families. But I love living here because I think you feed off that energy. Yeah. But it also represents a lot of optimism and hope for the future, that if we can thrive in environments like this, where it's not perfect, but we're still able to see growth, we're still able to see innovation, we're still able to see a lot of great ideas coming from startups and real economy businesses, that it gives me hope that imagine when those infrastructure gaps are filled, imagine when, we have better access to healthcare, we have better access to energy, the sky is the limit. Yeah. So I think for early adopters and people that have, sacrificed the comforts of developed markets to come and live here, it gives me a lot of hope that the future can only be bright. For the people that are here, that are, living off this energy, building resilience, building in this environment, that when things kind of come into play, we will be very fortunate to be a part of that growth.
So for globally, I think people are probably more attuned to the numbers of this, but for those in the US that might be missing some of the demographics and the data here, you're talking about a country of roughly probably
220 million people.
220 million people, but on pace by 2050 to exceed the population of the United States.
We'll be the third largest country in the world.
And that in itself is mind-blowing. 25 million people in a city could become 30, 40, 50 million people in a city.
Completely.
Truly one of the world's mega cities of
Huge.
that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot for people just to absorb kind of some of those statistics and kind of what's there. When you look at kind of where things are today, what are some of the things? There's the entrepreneurial dynamism, but what are some of the big pillars, the tent posts, if you will, that's going to be needed when we think about the next couple of decades of Nigeria and its growth and its entrepreneurial ecosystem? What are the missing pieces?
That's a great question. And how much time do you have?
2-3 days. We'll just be here. Yeah, sure.
No, I think there's some very, very key pillars. One is there is obviously a capital gap. There is a significant scarcity of capital. So we estimated at about $150 billion that is needed to fund the SMEs in this country that make up 90% of the workforce.
Yeah.
So SMEs are typically not getting access to capital from traditional financing. So whether that's banks that have, money on their balance sheets, but they're not willing to take that risk because you can get risk-free government bond returns at 20% in Naira. So why invest in an SME that may not have the collateral or may be deemed a little bit risky? So there is a huge scarcity of capital problem that I think is a pillar that will enable that young and budding and thriving population to really thrive in the next 30 to 50 years. We need to plug those access to capital gaps. So that's one pillar. Another pillar is I think that digital transformation needs to happen. So where people have access to, because of the infrastructure gaps, because of the lack of roads, how are people getting access to goods and services? We need to use technology for it to reach them quicker through their phones. So we've seen an explosion in embedded finance where people can get loans. They don't have to go to a bank. They can get it through a mobile phone.
Yeah.
We've seen where people can order goods and services for them to come to their doorstep. So I think that digital transformation of being able to have access to goods and services for that last mile consumer in a way that is non-traditional, where we've been able to leapfrog even some of our developed market counterparts. I think that's another pillar that I think.
And I think people hear leapfrog, but they don't recognize the pace of how much that leapfrogging is. And I mean, it's the speed of being able to do that. What would have taken decades is happening in years.
And we're forced to do that because we don't have any other option. And I think that's the beauty of what technology has done on the continent is it's forced some would say limitations, but it's forced those limitations to become into innovation and to very, very attractive investment opportunities. So I think digital transformation is another area. And then I think there is kind of just a skills gap and kind of a human capital capacity building and education of, we always talk about those youth numbers, but we also need to make sure that they're acquiring the right skills and they're getting the right education so that we have a workforce that is actually skilled and capable to fill in, the roles that will come through this burgeoning population because we have high unemployment rates today. We don't want that to continue to be the same numbers when we have
especially
a much larger
population growth.
have a much larger population. So I think human capital development and skills acquisition is also a big part of that puzzle. And then there is obviously the role that the government would have to play to make sure that there is not only an ease of doing business for businesses and corporations in terms of favorable tax policies and making sure that regulation is consistent. But there's also a gap that the government into play in just being able to provide basic goods and services. So healthcare infrastructure and roads and, schools and making sure that schools aren't going on strike and, things like that. So I think those kind of 4 pillars, scarcity of capital and making sure we have that capital, digital transformation and what's going to happen there and making sure that we can kind of leapfrog in a lot of areas through technology. And then the skills acquisition gap and human capacity development. And then the role that the government will play in just making sure the basics are covered. And I think we'll do that as we get better on our tax reforms and, making sure people are paying their taxes so that we can invest in the things that we need to invest in, and also making sure that we have leaders that are not just there for their own self-interest.
Small detail on that last one right there. No matter what country you live in, detail there.
That's always the case, not just in Africa, right?
Yeah.
The Faith-Driven Investor Conference. Here's to faithful disruptors, the ones who are spreading seeds instead of building storehouses. The ones who solve real problems and take righteous risks. God didn't give you your platform to play it safe. That's why every February, faith-driven investors across 100 countries are gathering in person, online, or at watch parties around the world. 3 hours, battle-tested investors, zero fluff. This isn't just hype, it's a movement. For more information, visit faithdriveninvestorconference.org. That's faithdriveninvestorconference.org. Together, we can solve the world's greatest problems.
One of the things that we're struck by in a conversation that we were having earlier was just this idea of just how God works when sometimes a small collection of faithful men and women come together, fully devoted for Him and His glory, and just kind of how it can shape cities and nations. And in some level today, like, we hear that and we're kind of surprised, like, oh my gosh, God can work that way. But yet when we look at the book, like, that's how He moved. I mean, you look at David and you look at the story of his mighty men, and it was a small group at a core. You look at Gideon and you can look at some of those different stories. Can you speak to just kind of the community of faith-driven entrepreneurs and faith-driven investors here, and just how there's a recognition of, man, this is such a unique time in our nation that we could shape and kind of have an effect on, is this about us? Is this about others? Is this about helping people flourish in the redemptive potential? Can you just talk about what God's doing in fund managers and just the community here?
No, I think that God is definitely moving in a big way in Nigeria. I think you're starting to see fund managers, you're starting to see entrepreneurs really start to understand stewardship and how the capital that they're providing to businesses can actually be redemptive and can actually help change systems, right? So you've spoken to some of the fund managers today. Through our fund, I have a very big passion on my heart for women, and thinking, how can we use capital to really be redemptive to women that have been overlooked and unseen? So as we're doing our different as we're doing our different missions in our different corners, I think that there is a lot of power when we're able to come together and say, okay, how can we as a community lobby government to take this, problem very seriously? How can we as a community really start to think about the effect that we're having on our portfolio companies, not just the founders, but their value chain? Could we make sure that the redemptive practices don't just stop with us, but we can really make sure that we are loving on our portfolio companies, and they're loving on their employees, and they're loving on their suppliers. So I think there's a lot that we can do as fund managers and stewards of capital to really influence how not only we're stewarding capital, but we're also changing behavior so that it really glorifies God in a way that it doesn't just stop with us, but we're able to be that salt and we're able to be that light and really transform the way people do business. So I think there is a community that's growing here. Where we realize it's not about us. We've all worked in, the large investment banks, and we've all worked in, and I think we left those places because to live life where it's only about you is a very, very boring life, I think. You really want to be able to showcase legacy. You really want to be able to showcase how has what we're doing, how has it impacted that woman who would have never had access to capital if we didn't show up. So I think there's something very powerful in that. And I think that's something that God would want. I think that's something that glorifies Him. I think that's something that when people can look at our fund and look at our businesses, they can really want to know the God that we serve. And it can be also a vehicle for also pointing to Him as well. So yes, I think there is a community that's growing, both of fund managers, but also entrepreneurs, and where we're using our businesses to really showcase real life examples of what it means to be God's children
Amen.
here on earth.
Well, I love the whole stewardship perspective, and I love that like that's one of the early seeds. I think oftentimes we talk about how generosity, it really is that gateway.
Mm-hmm.
It really is that bridge that we can't move from this idea of like, I don't know, from success to significance without this point of surrender.
Yeah.
Like we have to have that moment
Completely.
where we realize that we're cooks in his kitchen.
Yep,
Like
yep.
we are really working with the things that he's given to us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things that when we talk about faith-driven entrepreneurship and when faith-driven investing, we often have this idea that returns don't come at the expense of our values,
Completely.
but because of them.
Exactly.
And it's really out of that strength that we're able to really kind of see things that others might not be able to see. I'd love for you to talk about your fund in this perspective that really kind of, it's that similar premise of saying like, hey, female founders are able to see something that people might not otherwise
completely.
see. And it's out of that there's a unique strength and maybe even a unique return opportunity there.
Completely.
Can you build on that thought for us?
Yeah, sure. So when I was running another fund before I started Arura. I started Arura in July 2019, and it was really born out of the frustration that I couldn't see other examples of successful female fund managers on the continent. And there's that old adage that you can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to be what I couldn't see.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, let's build a fund where we're able to showcase the untapped potential of women from capital allocators all the way down to women in the value chain. And because we've seen all the research that shows that when women allocate capital, and they're the ones that are actually making the investment decision, they're 3 times more likely to invest in female founders. And what really annoyed me was Africa has the highest rate of female entrepreneurship in the world, 4 times more than Europe. We have more women starting businesses in Africa more than men, but we only have access to 2% of the capital. So female entrepreneurs are getting only 2% of capital. So that just didn't make sense to me because we make up 50% of the population. We have the highest rate of female entrepreneurship in the world. Why are we not getting the same access to capital?
So across the continent, 4 times more? Is that what you're saying?
4 times more than Europe.
Wow.
The rate of female entrepreneurship in Africa. So when I set out to set up Arura Capital, it was let us build a fund that solely invests in female-founded, female-led, and female-focused businesses. Because as a woman allocating capital, I have very good access to other female entrepreneurs through my networks. And as a female allocating capital, I also understand the goods and services that are catering to women. And we dug deeper and we saw that we have a $15 trillion female economy. Women are making 80% of purchasing decisions in the household. So if you're a woman allocating capital, you can really understand those goods and services that you would be, using as a consumer. So we really see it as an arbitrage opportunity to enhance returns, as you've said, because there's also a lot of research that shows that female founders actually generate more revenue than their male counterparts. So BCG have brought out data that says that for every dollar invested in a startup, a female founder returns 2.5 times more revenue than her male counterpart. We also have a lot of research that shows that gender diverse boards increase profitability on companies by more than 21%. So so that was the onus of which I said, okay, let's really showcase through Arura Capital how when you have a woman allocating capital, there's that natural trickle-down effect to not only gender diversity in management and in founders, but also gender diversity across the value chains of the companies. And through our first fund, we can now actually see those proof points because our fund 1 was a $20 million fund. We've invested in 11 companies. 70% of those companies are female founded and female led, and it's a top quartile fund. Our returns are above global benchmarks when you compare it to other 2019 vintages. And at the same time, we've been able to see about a 22x revenue growth in our companies since we invested. And we've also been able to see about a 7x valuation uplift when other larger strategic or private equity funds have come into our businesses. So we're really trying to prove through Arura Capital the significant arbitrage opportunity in enhancing returns when you invest in women across the value chain. But not only that, because we are redemptive stewards of capital. So we are making returns, but we're also making impact. So through our funds, We're also supporting about 205,000 direct and indirect jobs.
Wow.
70% of our employees are under the age of 35 years of age. So we're also really, really passionate about providing employment for youth. And what we've also seen as well is we've created about $150 million of value chain revenue. So this is something that we measure because we have participants in the value chain that are beneficiaries of the companies we invest in. So whether that's a female smallholder farmer in Kano that is able to provide offtake to our agribusiness, or a female POS agent that's using our financial services platform, or whether that's a female market woman that's using our solar freezers from a company we invested in called Coolbox. We've said, how is our capital impacting the life of that woman? And we were able to measure that, and we've seen that through our 13 companies between Fund 1 and Fund 2, we're creating close to $150 million of revenue that this woman in the value chain or this man in the value chain would have not had access to if we didn't make that investment into that SME. So I completely agree with you. We're very, very big proponents of you need to invest well, make money, make impact so that you can recycle that capital to do more.
Yeah.
We can't think about investing without a commercial return because then it's not sustainable.
Right.
So we think that through the work that we're doing with Arura Capital, where we have this focus on female-led and female-founded businesses as well as female-focused businesses, especially in the SME segment, where these are businesses that are traditionally overlooked by banks, traditionally overlooked by larger private equity funds, we're really able to cherry pick the best businesses to invest in, where we can make both a commercial financial return, but also very, very strong and measurable social impact outcomes as well.
I love the way that you talk about the value chain and that like those are very clear measurable numbers that we can really push into. I think a lot of times when we talk about the impact of faith-driven entrepreneurship and investing, we kind of get a little bit fuzzy with kind of like the measurables. And I think there's good searching and innovation that's trying to happen. But yet there's some of this that really is very clear. It's very definable. It's measurable. And it's just that we maybe look at the top and the bottom, but we miss the chain in the middle. And I love that. Push us in a little bit specific, maybe a company, and maybe you keep it nameless if you want, but if there's an industry in a sector, because I love the correlation of what you're talking about of, I think you said it was 70%.
70%
of the
is
buying
female-led.
decisions.
Oh, 80% of the buying decisions.
80% of the buying decisions
are made by women.
Yeah, and I want you to push into that because I think that as you talk about that chain, and of course there's the diversity of everything of what you talked about, but like really like understanding the buyer and really understanding that. Just talk about that through maybe the lens of one of the companies in the portfolio.
No, completely. And I always say that, people underestimate the economic force women represent on the continent. So we have an informal economy. Our economy is mostly informal. 90% of our economy is informal. And I think one of the research organizations estimate that to be about $1 trillion. And I'm coming on to a portfolio company. But out of that $1 trillion and that informal economy, I would say that 90% of that informal economy is controlled by market women. Women that are in, a little kiosk selling a sachet of milk, selling a bottle of water. So we want to invest in the businesses that are tapping into that economic force because that is really the engine of our economy.
Especially developing economies,
exactly.
That's the core to it.
That's the core to it. So we have a phenomenal business in our portfolio that is a B2B commerce business. That is providing digital tools to that market woman in a store. So they have an app where that market woman can come onto the app, can order her goods for her store that day. Within 24 hours, they have on-the-door fulfillment to order those goods. So she no longer has to leave her store to go and pick up or look for products. So she has access to that app. Through that app, she also has a payment platform where she can receive cash, she can receive payments, and through that payments, order more goods on the same app. And through that app, she can also get access to working capital. I think that's so powerful because that woman can't walk into a bank to get access to capital. So if you're able to provide a one-stop solution for that woman in that kiosk through a mobile phone, that digital transformation that we were talking about, not only providing the digital rails, but also solving for the infrastructure gaps because she now has on-the-door fulfillment of her goods. This business is really one of the most transformative businesses that we have in our portfolio. It's serving about 150,000 of these retailers in Nigeria, in Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. And since we've invested, we've just seen this company take off in terms of revenue growth. We've seen other large investors come into the business. And it's one that we really think this could be a Pan-African story where we're not only solving this problem, an end-to-end solution for retailers in Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana, but it's something that can expand across Africa. And I think it's businesses like that that get me excited, where these are unseen, overlooked segments of the market. Yeah. How are you able to create solutions to meet them where they are? Yeah. Rather than just ignore that segment of the society.
Yeah, and there's so much fascination these days about AI this, AI that, and they talk about agents and models and things that can essentially multiply the impact of people. And really what you're talking about is at a grassroots level. Completely. Is like if somebody doesn't have to go out, leave the shop, go to do X, Y, or Z, like that's replicating themselves. And
it's efficiency at scale.
Yeah, it's the sufficiency and scale that you can bring to that grassroots in an accessible level.
Exactly.
And I think that we just miss like finding the simplicity maybe on the other side of complexity, finding the accessible points.
Exactly.
How core that is as a lever of growth for developing
these markets.
Nations.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so important. And we have businesses like this. We have this business that is really interesting. It's the business called Omni Retail, the one I've just described. We have another business that is bringing solar solutions, so cooling solutions to market women that are in off-grid areas. They don't have access to power. This company is called Coolbox. Through a solar freezer, they can provide these women that are selling meat, selling fish that they have to throw out because they're in off-grid areas. Wow. They can provide them with access to power for up to 4 days, as long as they have access to the sun. And this is another business that is just meeting women where they are and providing a solution that works for them for productive use. Yeah. It's the only freezer in Africa, I believe, that has pay-go technology. So the woman doesn't have to pay upfront. She can lease to own over a 6-month, 12-month, 24-month period. So these are the things that really excite me as an investor, because you've seen a problem and you've designed something that meets the consumer where they are, where we've seen that, portfolio risk for these women, because it's for productive use, it's 98%. They're paying back. So solutions like that in developed markets are very, very scalable. They're very, very replicable across markets as well, because since we invested in Coolbox, they're now selling their product in 25 different countries. Wow. So when you're able to design specifically for that local context, you're really able to find very scalable solutions across the continent. So that gets me excited as an investor. Yeah. And as you said, we're obviously seeing the commercial viability and the return of these investments, but the impact is also undeniable. And I think that's the beauty of investing on the continent. I think it's one of the very few places where you can do both so seamlessly. You don't have to sacrifice one for the other at all. Yeah.
God owns it all, and He cares deeply about the how, where, and why behind our investment strategies. Money is put into our hands to steward wisely for His glory and for the flourishing of the people around us. That's why Faith Driven Investor created our foundation groups, 1 hour a week for 6 weeks, online or in person. Connect with like-minded investors to walk through the faith-driven investing study. Hear real-life stories of battle-tested investors solving some of the world's greatest problems. Discuss what it means to embrace your call to impact the world for God's glory, and get in the game. Don't battle alone. Your calling is too important. Visit faithdriveninvestor.org and join a group today.
I love the leapfrog thinking, that just kind of like you're not tied to the infrastructure. And even if you could quickly look at a growing city like this and say, oh my gosh, the tens of billions of dollars that might be needed in infrastructure development. But then there's the reality of like, hey, that's probably not around the corner. That's not coming.
It's
that's
not coming
happening
anytime soon. Yeah.
So that doesn't stop the innovation.
Exactly.
It just pivots it. And so to have that mindset of saying whether it's solar or whether it's digital payments or whatever
commerce,
it might be, commerce, like there's just this mindset of thinking of just not being held back.
And that's the resilience that I spoke about earlier, is you're able to thrive despite of the challenges, right? You're able to innovate despite of the challenges.
Yes.
I was at a conference last week and we were talking about, there's no Amazon, right, without roads. There's no Amazon without last mile logistics. And I think founders in Africa, we build the rails ourselves. We don't just deliver products. We have to build the digital rails. We have to build the infrastructure ourselves and the ecosystems ourselves to make sure that we can deliver these goods and services to consumers. But that's where the beauty is, and that's where the innovation is. Despite these challenges, and despite the fact that we don't have power figured out, we have 600 million Africans that lack access to electricity. We don't have the infrastructure and the roads figured out. We don't have the scarcity of capital. We don't, the scarcity of capital figured out. But we can design these solutions that address every single problem through digital transformation, where we can leapfrog and give that retailer exactly what they need. So that gets me very excited as an investor.
Well, there's the leapfrog side of it, but then there's also just like this idea of public-private partnerships, or private coming in and saying, hey, we will solve
those issues.
These issues. And I think that oftentimes, and I'd love for you as we kind of turn towards the end here, is just like pivoting towards this idea of like, we often have thought about helping people and impacting people through a very narrow lens. But you think about like great innovations in technology and the sustainable ripple effect of being able to help people. I mean, put the politics aside, you can look at something like Starlink or something like that and say, man, what has that done collectively to lift people into new opportunities? And people wouldn't look at that and say, oh, Starlink is like some charitable, benevolent thing at face value. But yet
it's helping so many people.
Helping so many people. Help people that are listening to this that have just had this narrow lens and they're looking at what's happening here in Nigeria and across the continent and saying, what's the potential for entrepreneurship, for investing, kind of to lead the way for really making a difference? What chapter are we in here?
I think we're in the best chapter, in Nigeria that we've been in a while. I think that with everything that's happened with this administration that just come in terms of the hard calls they've had to make with regards to policy, whether that's removing the fuel subsidy, whether that's unifying the currency, I think now is a very good time to invest in Nigeria. And now is a very good time to invest in private equity and venture capital in Nigeria, because we've just come out of what people call the funding winter. I think we're still in it. So you can get very good businesses, thriving businesses at very attractive valuations right now. And if you care about impact, and if you care about that leapfrogging that we've discussed, and if you care about reaching and having access to overlooked founders and underserved part of the markets, I think now is a very good time to invest, because the policy conditions, the macroeconomic conditions, we're kind of coming out of a recession. And I think going into the next 5 years would be a really, really great time for Nigeria in terms of what we're going to see in terms of the currency stabilization and just policies to drive investment in the country. But I also think that there's a lot of innovation coming out of Nigeria right now, because we've come out of this very trying time that businesses are really thinking about climate. They're thinking about commerce. They're thinking about payments. They're thinking about embedded finance in very, very attractive ways. So if you're an investor that is thinking about deploying capital and you're not deploying capital to Africa, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. We obviously know the big figures in terms of, 6 out of the 10 fastest growing, economies in the world are going to be here. We mentioned Nigeria will be the 3rd largest country in the world by 2050. So we have those kind of demographic tailwinds going for us. But I think that when you are here, like I am, and you're meeting with startups and businesses every day that are innovating, and you're seeing what's happening in healthcare, and you're seeing what's happening in commerce and payments and fintech, and we're seeing what's happening in climate and how people are innovating there with access to power and rural communities that otherwise wouldn't have access. It just gets us very excited as investors that we can identify these overlooked founders, we can invest in these underserved segments, and we have the luxury to pick. right?
Because
Because
at this stage, especially
at this stage, we have the luxury to pick because there's such a significant supply and demand mismatch. That as a fund manager, we have the luxury to pick the best investments that we want to do, that are aligned with our thesis and aligned with our mission, that we end up with a portfolio of 10 to 12 companies that are all fantastic. And I would say that, obviously. But I think that if you're an investor that's allocating capital, you can no longer afford to ignore or avoid the African continent, because this is really where the growth in the next 30 to 50 years is going to come from. And if you care about impact, if you care about your capital having purpose and meaning and impacting people in underserved communities, you can do both here. You can make a 4 or 5x return on your capital and at the same time create thousands and millions of jobs, lift people out of poverty, provide people with access to healthcare and education. So it's really the best of both worlds. And I think for the faith-driven investing community, Africa just makes sense because it's return on capital, return on investment, but also return on that heavenly capital as well, to make sure that when you're standing in those holy gates, you're making it into heaven, and you can account for how you've also spent the capital that God has provided to you as well in a meaningful and purposeful way.
Amen. There's such good, exciting times to it. And I think when you talk about the resilience and then you talk about the leapfrogging ability and you combine those two things and you talk about the potential to really kind of shape society, to shape nations, to shape outcomes. I think in faith-driven entrepreneurship, faith-driven investing, it's often hard. There's some layers, filters, charts, graphs, whatever you want to call it, that can be in between us and seeing the impact. And you talked about, yes, you can measure some things on the value chain, but there's just undeniable when you see some of these technologies and see what this could do for a person, a family, and then you extrapolate that over
to communities and to countries and nations.
You just, the undeniable to see what impact really is there. So, so encouraging to be with you.
Thank you.
So grateful for the work. I want to close just kind of as this thought, like, when you think about this, is there a passage of scripture? Is there something that comes alive to you when you think about the place that God has you in this season, the mission that he has? What comes to life and speaks to you?
So I always think about Daniel when I think about the work I do, because Daniel was just a beautiful contrarian. He did everything differently than the community he was in. And when I always, I go to these global forums and people kind of still have their nose down on Africa. They still don't really understand the immense potential that exists on the continent. And I meet people and it's like, yes, I was at JP Morgan. They're like, why did you go to Africa? Why did you stop? So I kind of have that contrarian. I've always had that contrarian, one of the early adopters. And I always kind of think back to Daniel and having that spirit of Daniel to just keep on, doing something different to the crowd, but being rewarded in heaven for being consecrated and being different. So Daniel always comes to my mind as I work this journey. Another scripture that comes to my mind is, I think it's Hebrews 10, where God says, scripture says that God will be faithful to keep his promises. And, I had a very difficult fundraising journey. So raising Fund 1 took about 7 years. Wow. So as a woman in this industry, it's also very challenging because I'm a solo GP. So raising that first fund as a woman where I couldn't be what, as I mentioned, I didn't see what I could be, or whatever the phrase is. It was difficult for me to see another example of a Black, successful African woman raising funds. So I think when we finally got to the final close of Fund 1, I was the first woman in Nigeria to have raised over a $10 million fund. So also just having that resilience and having that anchor in my heart that I'm called to do this, and God will provide the resources. God will make sure that he opens the doors to enable me to continue to do this. I've had to really rely on having faith in God's promises to deliver the outcome. So yes, I think that I rely on I got a lot of my confidence to keep on going. and the resilience to keep on going, just trusting on the promises of God, and the promises of Him providing not only the resources, but, there's another scripture I love in Revelations that says, no one can shut the door that God has opened. So that's also something that encourages me is, yes, it's going to be a very difficult journey. We're now raising Fund 2. It's going to be difficult to raise Fund 3, I'm sure. But just having that kind of quiet peace in my heart that as a faith-driven investor, as a Christian, I gather a lot of strength from the fact that I'm in this journey with God, and that as He's promised me, that this will it's not just me, right? Because I've kind of left the comforts of JP Morgan and, the 6-figure salary to really do what I feel I'm called to do, which will impact women and impact people in Africa and impact hopefully millions of young people that can also look to me and say, okay, well, maybe I can do this as well. Yeah. So being that beacon of light, I think that it also gives me a lot of strength that as I rely on God and as I kind of yield perfectly to Him, He will provide the resources for me to complete this work and finish well.
Amen.
So yes, I get a lot of encouragement from just knowing that I'm not doing this alone. Even though I'm a solo GP in the physical sense, in the spiritual sense, God has been my partner since day one.
Amen. Well, what a gift it is for us to being able to travel the world and to really just spotlight what God's already been doing for quite some time, and to hear that in your story. And I think about from my journey, just how 20, 30 years ago, you just look around and you couldn't find the stories of like, oh, it looks like this and it looks like that. And yet over the last 20 years, how powerful it's been when you see those stories and you see people 10, 20 years, whatever it might be ahead. It's an encouragement, it's a validation, it's a pattern of how God's working. Yeah. And I'm just so grateful for what those have been in my life. And I know so many are going to be grateful for the work that you're doing and giving that encouragement to others. So thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
To be with you.
Thank you.
So friends, it's always great to be with you. As we leave, you might be thinking about what are some of the practical next steps. First, I hope you're just encouraged to see the way that God's at work building year after year, decade after decade, and generation after generation to advance His gospel and His kingdom through the marketplace. The other thing I want to encourage you with is if you're looking for capital, just find like-minded partners there in the journey. We have a list of those on the website, broken down by different regions and different profiles and different things that they might invest in. And if you're on that journey, I would encourage you, it's so much better to be on that with like-minded partners that get not only your business model, but really understand your why. So check that out, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Come for content, stay for community. Join a faith-driven investing group online or in person. Visit faithdriveninvestor.org. That's faithdriveninvestor.org.